Rebecca Mason adjusted her worn gray sweater and tucked a loose strand of blonde hair into her ponytail. At 38, she still had the same approachable look that had first caught her husband's eye 15 years ago. Today, she dressed deliberately, in comfortable clothes, practical and completely unremarkable. "Are you certain you want to go through with this?" asked Victor Mason, adjusting his navy tie. At 56, he cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, every inch the successful banker. "Someone needs to," Rebecca replied, grabbing her simple handbag. "You said yourself you wanted to know how your new branch is really treating regular customers." Victor nodded, concern evident on his face. 3 months earlier, his banking group had acquired Pinewood Financial, a mid-sized regional bank with 8 branches throughout Maine. Customer complaints had been flooding in from the Portland branch. Accusations of rudeness, preferential treatment, and staff looking down on ordinary folks. "Just remember, don't reveal who you are," Victor reminded her. "We need to see how they treat you when they think you're just an average person off the street." Rebecca laughed softly. "Trust me, in this outfit, they'll never guess I'm married." To the owner. Their plan was simple. Rebecca would visit the Portland branch posing as a regular customer, needing to deposit a check and inquire about a loan. Victor would arrive an hour later for his scheduled meeting with the branch manager. Together, they'd compare notes on Rebecca's experience. "We're still on for lunch after, right?" Rebecca confirmed, checking her watch. "Absolutely. I'll meet you at the bank around noon, then we'll head to that little Italian place you love." Victor kissed her cheek. "Just don't let them get to you. If what we've heard is true, they can be pretty nasty." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "I've dealt with plenty of snobs in my life, Victor. Remember when I first met your mother?" They both laughed, recalling how Victor's Boston aristocrat mother had initially dismissed Rebecca as a quaint country girl from rural Vermont. It had taken years for the older woman to recognize Rebecca's quiet strength and intelligence. Besides, Rebecca added, "If things get really bad, I can always drop your name." Victor shook his head firmly. "That's exactly what we don't want. We need to see their real behavior, not how they act when they know the boss's wife is watching." As Rebecca headed for the door, Victor called after her, "Just promise me you'll be careful. Some people don't like being called out on their behavior." "It's a bank, not a battlefield," Rebecca replied with a smile. "What's the worst that could happen?" Little did she know she was about to find out. The Portland branch of Pinewood Financial stood imposingly on Main Street, all gleaming glass and polished granite. Rebecca parked her modest sedan, deliberately chosen over their luxury vehicles, and walked toward the entrance, observing everything with a keen eye. The security guard barely glanced at her as she pushed through the revolving door. Inside, the bank hummed with mid-morning activity. Tellers worked behind their stations, suited employees conferred in hushed tones, and customers waited in designated areas, most dressed in business attire or smart casual clothing. Rebecca approached the information desk where a young man in a crisp shirt looked up from his computer. "Good morning," she said pleasantly. "I need to make a deposit and discuss a personal loan." He glanced at her casual attire, the gray sweatshirt, simple jeans and worn sneakers, and his smile tightened. Almost imperceptibly. "Do you have an account with us?" he asked, his tone slightly cooler than it had been a moment before. "Yes, I do," Rebecca replied, noticing the subtle shift. "Name?" "Rebecca Mason." He typed into his computer, then frowned slightly. "I don't see a Rebecca Mason in our system." "That's strange," Rebecca said. "I've been banking with Pinewood for years." The young man shrugged. "Perhaps you're confusing us with another institution. We do have rather high minimum balance requirements." The implication was clear, and Rebecca felt a flicker of indignation. She was tempted to point out that the Mason family owned controlling interest in the parent company, but she stuck to the plan. "I'm quite certain," she insisted calmly. "Could you check again? Maybe under R. Mason?" With a barely concealed sigh, he typed again. "Nothing." You'll need to speak with a customer service representative. He gestured toward a tall woman in a blue uniform who was sorting papers at a nearby desk. Ms. Hartley can assist you. As Rebecca approached, she couldn't help noticing how Ms. Hartley's gaze swept over her, taking in her casual appearance with a look of thinly veiled disdain. Can I help you? The woman's tone suggested she very much doubted she could. Yes, I'd like to make a deposit and inquire about a personal loan, Rebecca repeated. Do you have an appointment? Ms. Hartley asked sharply. No, I don't. We generally require appointments for loan consultations. The woman's finger tapped impatiently on her desk, especially for significant amounts. Ms. Hartley's eyes flicked to Rebecca's simple clothing again, the assumption clear. This woman wouldn't qualify for any significant amount. I understand, Rebecca said evenly, but perhaps you could make an exception this once. Ms. Hartley's lips thinned into something resembling a smile. Let's start with seeing some ID, shall we? Rebecca reached into her handbag and pulled out her driver's license, handing it to Ms. Hartley. The bank employee examined it with exaggerated scrutiny, holding it up to the light as if checking for counterfeiting. This address is in Fairfield. County? Hartley remarked with raised eyebrows. That's quite a drive to our humble branch. I had business in Portland today, Rebecca explained patiently. I thought I'd take care of my banking while I was here. Hartley handed back the license with a pinched expression. And what exactly is it you're hoping to deposit today, Mrs. Mason? Rebecca pulled out a check for $5,000. It wasn't a huge sum, by banking standards, but it was substantial enough that most banks would treat it with respect. Hartley took the check between two fingers, as if it might be contaminated. And where did this come from? She asked, her tone suggesting something illicit. It's a legitimate check, Rebecca replied, her patience wearing thin. From my personal account at another bank. By now, several customers were watching the interaction. Hartley made a show of scrutinizing the check from every angle. You understand we have procedures for unusual transactions, she said loudly enough for others to hear, especially from infrequent customers. I'd hardly call a simple deposit unusual, Rebecca countered. Hartley's smile didn't reach her eyes. Well, ordinarily no, but we have standards at Pinewood Financial. We cater to a certain clientele. A man in an expensive suit standing nearby smirked, clearly appreciating the show Hartley was putting on. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm, but maintained her composure. Are you refusing to deposit my check? She asked directly. Not at all, Hartley replied with artificial sweetness. But there would be an extended hold period, perhaps up to 15 business days, for verification purposes. Rebecca knew this was absurd. Standard hold times were nowhere near that long, especially for established banks. That seems excessive, Rebecca said firmly. I'd like to speak with a manager, please. Hartley's smile turned brittle. I'm afraid Mr. Blackwood is in meetings all morning. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a different institution, one more suited to your financial situation. The woman's eyes flicked pointedly to Rebecca's. Sweatshirt and jeans? My financial situation? Rebecca repeated, disbelieving. Hartley leaned forward, lowering her voice to a stage whisper. Let's be honest, Mrs. Mason. This branch serves clients with significant assets and investment portfolios. From your appearance and this unusual transaction, I'm guessing that's not you. Several nearby customers were now openly watching, some with uncomfortable expressions, others with the same smug superiority as Hartley. You're judging me based on my clothes? Rebecca asked, loud enough for others to hear. I'm making an assessment, based on my experience, Hartley snapped, dropping her veneer of politeness. And right now, you're holding up my line with a transaction that's obviously problematic. There's nothing problematic about my check or my account, Rebecca insisted. Hartley stood up straight, her patience clearly gone. Look, I don't have time for this. You're clearly not our typical client. We have wealthy customers waiting. She pointed at Rebecca's simple clothing. People who can afford to dress appropriately for a premier financial institution. Rebecca stood her ground. I'd like to see your manager immediately. "And I'd like you to leave," Hartley retorted, gesturing toward the exit. "You're broke. We don't serve your kind here." Her finger jabbed the air accusingly. "Take your check somewhere." Else, the bank had gone silent. Every eye was on them now, watching as the woman in the blue uniform pointed toward the door, her face flushed with indignation, while Rebecca stood stunned by the naked prejudice on display. "I can't believe this is happening," Rebecca said, her voice steady despite her shock. "You're actually asking me to leave because of how I'm dressed." Hartley squared her shoulders, emboldened by the authority she believed she wielded. "I'm asking you to leave because you're disrupting our business environment. Our clients expect a certain atmosphere of professionalism and exclusivity." A security guard had materialized nearby, watchful but not yet intervening. Rebecca noticed several customers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, while others seemed almost entertained by the spectacle. "This is discrimination," Rebecca stated firmly, "and entirely unprofessional." "Call it whatever you want," Hartley replied dismissively. "But unless you can prove you have the financial standing to be here, I'm going to have to insist you leave." The security guard took a half-step forward at Hartley's subtle nod. "And what exactly would prove my financial standing?" Rebecca asked, fighting to keep her voice level. "A designer handbag, expensive jewelry, or just a different last name?" Hartley's face hardened. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be, Mrs. Mason." She gestured to the security guard. "Please escort this woman out. She's becoming belligerent." "I'm not being belligerent," Rebecca protested as the guard approached. "I'm a customer attempting to conduct legitimate business." The guard, a middle-aged man with a sympathetic expression, looked uncomfortable with his assignment. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Rebecca felt a surge of indignation, but also a strange sense of vindication. Victor had been right. There was clearly a toxic culture at this branch that needed addressing. Still, being physically escorted out was more than she'd bargained for. "Fine," she said, gathering her dignity along with her purse. "But this isn't over." As the guard led her toward the exit, Rebecca noticed a few customers watching with disapproving expressions, disapproving of Hartley, not of her. One elderly woman in particular looked outraged by what she'd witnessed. Outside on the bank steps, the guard spoke quietly. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I'm sorry about that. Ms. Hartley can be difficult." "Is she always like this?" Rebecca asked. The guard glanced over his shoulder. "Let's just say some customers get treated differently than others." Rebecca checked her watch. It was 11:45 a.m. Victor would be arriving for his meeting soon. Part of her wanted to wait right there to see Hartley's face when she realized her mistake, but the other part knew it would be more powerful if she simply returned as scheduled. "Thank you," she said to the guard. "I appreciate your kindness." As she walked to her car, Rebecca felt a mix of emotions: anger at the humiliation she'd endured, sadness that people were still judged so nakedly by appearances, and a steely determination to ensure that changes would be made. She sat in her car for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed. "Victor? You're not going to believe what just happened." Victor Mason arrived at the Portland branch at precisely noon, his driver pulling the black luxury sedan to the curb with practiced precision. Impeccably dressed in his tailored navy suit, silk tie, and Italian leather shoes, he cut an imposing figure as he stepped onto the sidewalk. At his side was Rebecca, who had met him around the corner to brief him on her experience. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Rebecca asked, somewhat surprised by the cold fury in her normally good-natured husband's eyes. "Absolutely," Victor replied, his voice controlled but tight. "What happened to you wasn't just bad customer service, Rebecca. It was elitism at its worst." He straightened his tie. "And it stops today." As they approached the entrance, the same security guard who had escorted Rebecca out earlier did a double-take. His eyes widened in recognition, not of Victor, but of Rebecca returning so soon, and with significant reinforcement. Inside, the bank continued its business as usual. Hartley was still at her desk, now speaking with a well-dressed couple who were nodding appreciatively at whatever she was saying. Victor scanned the room, noting the expensive artwork, the hushed conversations, the atmosphere of exclusivity that had been cultivated. Then his gaze settled on Hartley, and his jaw tightened. "Mr. Mason!" The branch manager, Gregory Blackwood, hurried across the marble floor, hand extended in greeting. "We weren't expecting you until—" He faltered, noticing Rebecca beside Victor. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've met my wife," Victor completed firmly. "Rebecca Mason." Blackwood's expression flickered with confusion, then alarm as realization began to dawn. "Your wife?" "Yes," Victor confirmed, "who was just forcibly escorted from this building less than 30 minutes ago." The color drained from Blackwood's face. There must be some mistake. We would never— It was that woman, Rebecca said quietly, pointing toward Hartley, who was still chatting animatedly with her clients, unaware of the drama unfolding across the room. By now, several employees had noticed Victor's arrival. Whispers spread rapidly, and heads turned in their direction. Hartley, sensing the shift in atmosphere, looked up. The moment her eyes landed on Rebecca, her expression hardened into irritation. Then she saw Victor standing beside her, and confusion flickered across her face. Blackwood cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office, Mr. Mason." "No," Victor replied firmly. "What happened today didn't occur behind closed doors. Neither will the consequences." He strode across the floor toward Hartley's desk, Rebecca and the increasingly anxious Blackwood following in his wake. Hartley stood as they approached, her professional smile firmly in place, though her eyes kept darting suspiciously to Rebecca. "Good afternoon," she began smoothly. "How may I assist you today, sir?" Victor regarded her coldly. "You can start by explaining why you ejected my wife from this bank earlier this morning." Hartley blinked, the smile freezing on her face. "Your wife?" Her eyes flicked to Rebecca, then back to Victor, disbelief written across her features. "Yes, Ms. Hartley," Victor continued, his voice carrying in the now silent bank. "Rebecca Mason, my wife of 15 years, who you informed was broke and didn't belong here." Hartley's face drained of color. There was a misunderstanding. She couldn't verify her account information." "That's not true," Rebecca interjected calmly. "You refused to properly check my information and made assumptions based on my appearance." Blackwood stepped forward, desperation in his eyes. "Mr. Mason, I can assure you this is not how we train our staff to interact with clients." "And yet," Victor replied, "it's apparently how they behave when they think no one important is watching." Hartley seemed to shrink under Victor's gaze, the full magnitude of her error finally dawning on her. "Mr. Mason," she stammered, "I had no idea that—" "Which is precisely the problem," Victor cut her off. "Allow me to be perfectly clear, Ms. Hartley," Victor said, his voice level, but carrying throughout the now silent bank. "Your behavior today exemplifies exactly what's wrong with this branch." Hartley stared at him, her face ashen. "Sir, if I had known who Mrs. Mason was, then you would have treated her with respect," Victor finished. "That's exactly the problem. In banking, in life, respect shouldn't be reserved only for those you think have power or money. By now, everyone in the bank was watching. Employees, customers, even the security guard who had escorted Rebecca out earlier." Blackwood looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Victor Mason," Victor continued, for the benefit of those who hadn't yet connected the dots, CEO of Atlantic Financial Group, which, as of 3 months ago, owns Pinewood Financial. A collective gasp rippled through the bank. Hartley's knees seemed to buckle slightly, and she gripped the edge of her desk for support. "My wife came here today at my request," Victor explained, addressing everyone now, "to experience how this branch treats ordinary customers. Not VIPs, not the wealthy, Just regular people who deserve the same respect and service as anyone else. He turned his attention back to Hartley. And what she found was a culture of elitism, judgment, and discrimination that has no place in any business, let alone one that I own. Hartley opened her mouth, then closed it again, apparently unable to find words. "Mr. Blackwood," Victor said, turning to the branch manager, "I'll need your office for the next hour. I'll be conducting interviews with your staff, beginning with the security guard who at least showed my wife some basic human dignity." Blackwood nodded weakly. "Of course, sir." "As for you, Ms. Hartley," Victor continued, "you're suspended, effective immediately. Whether that suspension becomes permanent will depend on the findings of our full investigation." "But Mr. Mason," Hartley finally managed to speak, her voice barely a whisper, "I've been with Pinewood for 8 years. I have an exemplary record with certain types of clients, perhaps," Victor interrupted. "But a bank serves all its customers, Ms. Hartley, not just the ones you deem worthy based on their clothes or appearance." He gestured toward the exit. "Please collect your personal belongings and leave the premises. HR will contact you tomorrow." As Hartley stood frozen in shock, Rebecca stepped forward. There was no triumph in her expression, only a quiet dignity. "The true measure of a person," she said softly, "isn't how they treat people they think are important. It's how they treat those they think aren't." 1 month later, Rebecca and Victor returned to the Portland branch, entering the sunlit lobby hand in hand. The changes were subtle but significant. The imposing teller counters had been replaced with more approachable, open stations. The intimidating reception desk was gone, replaced by a welcoming concierge area. Even the lighting seemed warmer, less harsh. "Mrs. Mason! Mr. Mason!" a familiar voice called out. It was the security guard who had escorted Rebecca out that day, now wearing a name tag identifying him as Owen Porter, customer service manager. "Owen," Rebecca greeted him warmly. "Congratulations on the promotion." He smiled, looking more at ease in his new role. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity. The changes you've implemented here, they've made a real difference." Victor nodded, surveying the bustling branch with satisfaction. "How are the new policies working out?" "Honestly," Owen replied, "business has increased. Turns out when you treat all customers with respect, more people want to bank with you." They chatted for a few more minutes before continuing their tour. Several employees greeted them, some new faces, some familiar ones who had survived the restructuring that followed that fateful day. Near the exit, they paused to observe an elderly woman in worn clothing being assisted attentively by a young teller. The woman was clearly not wealthy, but she was receiving the same courteous service as the businessman in an expensive suit at the next station. "You know," Rebecca said quietly, "some good actually came from that horrible day." Victor squeezed her hand. "That's the thing about exposing rot. It gives you the chance to rebuild something better." As they left the bank, Rebecca noticed a framed statement of values prominently displayed near the entrance. At the top was a simple but powerful phrase: "Every customer deserves our respect." She smiled. Sometimes being underestimated was the most powerful position of all.